From Resident Evil 4 to crime boss Rockay City, March was a pretty big month for video games. So without further ado, let's dive into the gaming news of March 2023. The remake of Resident Evil 4 finally released at the end of this month, and although I haven't quite finished it, I'm about 10 hours in, I can tell that this is an incredible remake. So I have played the original, granted it was the MetaQuest 2 version, so it probably looked a bit better than the 2005 edition, but I can still tell that a lot of work has gone into remaking this game, and so many things have been improved, refined, or just recreated in a much more powerful engine. They really didn't hold back with any aspect of this game, even sort of changing the story in some areas, just to improve the pacing and to make the plot more cohesive. In terms of sales numbers, they've just revealed that it sold 3 million copies in the first 2 days. That makes it 29% bigger than the original GameCube version.
Wow, that's a huge amount. I think it's great to see that they're recovering from the backlash they received from Resident Evil 5 and in particular 6 quite a few years ago. They started with Resident Evil 7, which people seem to like quite a lot. And recently they've had Resident Evil 8, they've had all of the remakes. In particular, Resident Evil 4 Remake, as you just said, but also Resident Evil Village was released to massively successful critic reviews and players loved it. And this remake is just another step on their road to resurgence. Another game that released this month was crime boss Rockay City, and after playing just a few hours of it, it is clear that it's heavily inspired by Payday 2. But I really don't think that's a bad thing. We played the first co-op mission in our first impressions video, and as a whole, it was really enjoyable. It seemed to take the mechanics of Payday 2 and just kind of modernise them a bit with better graphics and overall a fresh coat of paint. It is a shame that the main campaign isn't fully co-op, especially considering that you have bot teammates that you can control. But at the same time, we never got a chance to try out the multiplayer mode, which could be quite good, and having a fully separate campaign just for co-op was always a nice addition. So for that reason alone, I can't really complain, and I quite liked it.
But unfortunately, critics don't seem to agree. Currently, it's sitting at 48 on Metacritic, which is absolutely atrocious. That puts it in the generally unfavorable reviews category. There were some 7 out of 10 reviews, some 6s, but no one seemed to love it. The co-op stories mode has seen some praise, which does align with what we said, but the writing has been criticized a lot. And it's a shame because it could have been really good. Again, we liked the art style, we thought the gameplay was solid. Who knows, maybe they'll release new DLC and updates that make it better, but so far, critics are not convinced. One of my most anticipated PlayStation VR 2 games released this month, and that is of course the Dark Pictures Switchback VR. It's from the developers of Until Dawn Rush of Blood, and I really quite liked it. I thought the shooting mechanics were great, they implemented the DualSense features really well, and as a game it was quite a bit more fleshed out than its predecessor. It's essentially a ride through the Dark Pictures anthology's biggest hits, with each level being dedicated to a different game in the series. On top of each of the game segments, there is an overarching story. It doesn't take center stage, but I still found it fairly engaging. Of course, this game is very different to the actual Dark Pictures anthology, being a roller coaster shooter, but it does take some aspects from the flat screen series. Most notably, you can actually make choices. They aren't nearly as major as some of the ones in the flat screen versions, but they do still impact the end of the game. Though I did enjoy the game on the whole, there were definitely some problems. The most apparent of which was the horribly blurry resolution. At some points, it looked like a PSVR 1 game, and it's not like the graphics are even that impressive. Even with these fairly noticeable optimizations, the game still ran fairly poorly. It runs at 60 FPS with reprojection, but I still saw some stutters. So while I did enjoy the game overall, its technical state is incredibly poor.
The final release of the month was The Last of Us Part 1 for PC. Unfortunately, despite the first game being unanimously regarded as a masterpiece, the PC port right now is a buggy mess. At the time of recording, it's got 34% positive reviews on Steam, leaving it at mostly negative, which when compared to other recent Sony ports such as Uncharted, which is currently sitting at 86% positive reviews, that's absolutely terrible. Which is a huge shame, as this is for many people their first experience of playing The Last of Us as a game after the recently released TV show, and it releasing in its current state just seems like it's going to leave a sour taste in many of those people's mouths.
Even though no one really expected it to launch in this poor of a state, there were still a few red flags before the game released. It did actually get delayed for just under a month, which really confuses me because surely that delay was used to polish the game and optimize it for all hardware. Not only that, but it also seems like critics had not got access to this game before it released, which is generally seen as a fairly shady practice. And it's really surprising from Naughty Dog, as they're held in such high regard god. So this whole situation is just generally confusing.
On the topic of The Last of Us, earlier this month, the final 2 episodes of the live-action adaptation released. Just like the rest of the show, they released massive critical acclaim, and on the back of that, Neil Druckmann himself announced that there will be a second season of the show, and that the events of Part 2 will take place over multiple different seasons. This is especially important as one of the few complaints people had about the first season of the show was the pacing, and considering Part 2 has so much more story to tell, I think that's a very smart idea.
By far, my most anticipated game of 2023 finally got a definitive release date. Starfield is now confirmed to be releasing on the 6th of September this year.
On top of the release date, there seems to be a lot of discussion about the 18+ rating that the Australian Classification Board has given the game. This not only puts it in the same category as games like GTA 5, but this hopefully means we shouldn't see any further delays. Finally, we seem to have a release month for the long-awaited sequel to Insomniac's Spider-Man game, courtesy of the voice actor of Venom, Tony Todd. A fan of the games on Twitter simply asked him when he thinks the release date will be, and he responded with looks like September and massive publicity coming in August. So what that shows is that we should hopefully be seeing more and more about the game as time goes on, and that we won't be waiting any more than a few months. This isn't entirely surprising, as we did know there was a planned full release date, but it is quite funny to see that one of the biggest releases of this year has had its release date revealed by none other than one of its own voice actors.